Welcome back to the Aromatic Mystery School. I'm Elizabeth Ashley, the Secret Healer, and I am really excited about my chat today. I'm here to introduce you to an associate teacher of the Aromatic Mystery School, a wonderful aromatherapist by the name of Michelle Roques O'Neil. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, Liz. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm so excited about your school as well.
Oh, thank you.
Much needed.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to really say lovely things about you, because I'll tell people that you and I met in Beijing back in 2000. Well, actually, no, we met at Heathrow Airport, did we not?
Yes, we did. I remember watching that painfully.
And, I couldn't get through customs because I dropped a pound coin in my shoe, in my case. And they had overbooked the flight, so I didn't have a seat. The whole thing was really bad, but Michelle kept me calm all the way through. And when we got to Beijing, I realised what a fortunate event I had had, meeting a lady with so much aromatherapy experience. So I will say that I'm so impressed by this, voted one of the best aromatherapists in the world by British Vogue. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. I mean, and what was quite amazing about it, it was actually alongside my mentor, Michelle Roques. So it was quite a feather in my cap, very unexpected, but lovely.
Magnificent. And perhaps a lot of aromatherapists around the world may not be aware of your work, because rather than being all over social media, you're very much involved in hands-on work in your clinic in London, are you not?
Yeah, I have been. I'm now stepping out a lot more, but yes, I've tended to focus much more on the treatments and working with people. I have done projects. I also work as a consultant, but yes, in the main, I'm not. I sort of slightly shy away almost too much from being on social media all the time.
Well, this is going to break that mold, I think, because people are going to be so excited to learn from you, I think. So I was delighted when you said, well, I would love to teach vibratory aromatherapy, or perhaps what other people might call vibrational frequency healing of essential oils, or subtle aromatherapy, because that's very much my background. That's how I was taught, but there just aren't enough hours in the day to teach everything. And so for somebody who has so much experience, more experience than I have, to say, I'll come and teach it for you, I was like, yes. So I would love you to tell people a little bit about what you mean by vibratory aromatherapy.
Okay. It's very interesting. I was reflecting on this morning. I do morning pages every day. And I was thinking back to when I worked with Michelle Roques. So that was my introduction to aromatherapy. And what was really interesting about Michelle, it wasn't a Swedish massage with essential oils. It was a very, very specific treatment we learned. And it was an energetic treatment. So pretty much my introduction to aromatherapy was via an energetic route, just like yours. And I think she was really ahead of the curve, because the treatment we learned was very much based on balancing the parasympathetic nerve, the autonomic nervous system, and it worked with magnetism and polarity therapy, which in the 80s was really ahead of the curve for someone to have actually put that all together into a format. So it really introduced me into that world of energy. And in terms of how she taught us about essential oils, she just gave us 10 oils and a notebook. And she said, now I just want you to track these 10 oils and actually monitor the effects of how it worked on every individual. And that actually, as much as I wanted to delve into all the hundreds of oils that were out there, I actually found that discipline really I'm very grateful for it, because the way I learned about the oils became a relationship. It really was learning about their personalities, both energetically, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So that was kind of my introduction. Well, why I've mentioned it is because I think it was so ahead of its time. And I think we've suddenly done this complete 360 where people are now beginning to acknowledge the fact that these oils have an incredible innate intelligence, that they have these frequencies that are very, very profound and can actually tap into our pineal gland, for example, where we hold our memories. So really, essential oils and their frequency work in no time, because our memories can go back to childhood, they can go back karmically to another lifetime. So what you have within the power of these oils is an ability to tap into sometimes patterns people have been looping in for many lifetimes or for many generations. So I found that really frequency. I found that really interesting, and that in tandem with a lot of work I've been doing into quantum healing suddenly kind of brought together two bookends for me. That I kind of thought, if we started to use the oils in a slightly different way to tap into this quantum field where we're bypassing the kind of biology, our biological looping, which is all based on memory, and actually transcending it into much more our soul purpose. I thought using oils to bring up people's frequency so they could actually dissolve their programming would be really interesting. So that's where I came in. Long in explanation, sorry.
Just a small thing then. It's a small thing. It's enormous, isn't it? You know, when you start thinking about all the different ways that you can use essential oils, we're so stuck down the road of clinical, because fantastic that we've made all of this progress in what we know about clinical essential oils, but all of this stuff that is so important, another way of healing, will get forgotten if we do not apply ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, we were having a chat the other day, and the problem is, I think we don't acknowledge our legacy enough in aromatherapy. If you look at Ayurvedic tradition, if you look at acupuncture, if you look at herbalism, they all go back over 2,000 years. And, you know, there were really strong, powerful traditions of healing then. And it wasn't just the application of oils, it was working with people's energy patterns. And they
Yeah,
were
for sure.
using the oils vibrationally. And we've sort of somehow diminished it because as I understand it, because certainly when I was working with Micheline, aromatherapy was couched in the guise of beauty therapy. And so we didn't even start it from a place of feeling valid. And I think what happened as a result is a lot of senior aromatherapists suddenly said they had to find justification for aromatherapy. And so it became very empirical. It went down this clinical route. We've got to have authenticity as a traditional, as a medicine. And actually, I think that created a big disconnect rather than actually infusing both ends of it. Because, you know, when I trained like you, I had to learn about all the systems of the body. I had to understand the physiology of every system. So, you know, it wasn't based on woo-woo, it was actually fact. And then you applied the sort of intelligence of the plant oils to what was, because, you know, in terms of healing people, it's never what is presented that is the problem. There
No.
is always a root to the problem. So when you're, well, I know certainly when I'm blending, and I'm sure that it's the same with you, I'm actually kind of thinking, what pattern do I need to break in order to bring them up to an optimum level of energy and well-being?
Yes, and I really think that that brings me to my next question, really, because in your bio, you've written the most beautiful thing. You've written you devoted 40 years into trying to understand the sacredness of self. And I thought, oh, that's beautiful words. And I think it's such important work. So would you like to talk a little bit about
Okay.
that?
Well, I actually don't think we value who we are. We don't take time to um, to acknowledge the journey of life we take and all of the learning and all of the skills we gain. What we tend to look at a lot in life is the scarcity, the lack. You know, very interestingly, I was watching a program last night and I was listening to the language, and it was mainly politicians on the program. And I was kind of thinking to the language that they were using, and it was all about being broken, being wrong. And it was all this very low vibe language. And I think we surround ourselves in belief systems that don't acknowledge how beautiful we are. We're constantly, you know, we worked a lot initially through the gut and through the the thinking mind, and so that was based on fear and also expectation. And so we were never enough. And now that we're beginning to understand how powerful our hearts are, and actually they're the main valve that generates and moves us forward in life. It's where our soul resides, and this new way of being is beginning to evolve, where it's coming through loving and nurturing ourselves, that we can see that we can begin to transform and move beyond the repetitive belief systems and patterns we get locked into and never seem to be able to dissolve. I don't know if
Yeah.
that made sense. Did it?
It made complete sense. It was beautifully put. So you're going to be teaching a course for us. I'll just frame that before we go forward. So what it will be is, for those who are interested in doing it, will be an introductory session for people to come and have a go and see if they like this modality, let's call it. But then it will be a 6-week course. So tell us a little bit about the things that you're thinking of teaching within it.
I yes, of course. Well, I think first of all, we've really got. I know that's not so for most aromatherapists, but there, I think us as humanity have got disconnected from nature. And I think
Mhm.
we need to sort of understand the synergy between plants and nature and tree, and how it affects us, that we're a reflection of those natural forms. We have the water, we have the minerals within us. So there's a resonance, okay? So we're going to talk about resonance. We're also going to look into numerology and vibration of numbers, the significance of numbers, both ordinary numbers and prime numbers, and the meanings behind them. Because I think when you know, numbers have existed for many millennium, you know, and people have used them for a reason, because they have vibrations. And I for a long time have blended with neurological vibrations, but alongside the numbers we then start to look at the frequencies of each plant. And from my numerological perspective, we start to break down what the names of the plants have as vibrations, and also the frequency. So, you know, if you have a frequency of, say, 352, okay, 352, which is rose, okay, 3 is the number of spirit, 5 is the number of emotional freedom, 2 is the number of the inner mind, the inner landscape. And they combine to make 8, which is as above, so below. So when you're using rose, for example, that's the journey it's taking on. It's bringing spirit into form. It's actually touching you at an profound emotional level. It's helping you to liberate yourself from the bonds of the belief systems and patterns and also soul contracts we've made. Okay. And then you've got the 2, which is the imaginal reality. So it's moving into that landscape where you can transcend it. And then you have 8, which means that you're integrating it and making it walk in your daily life. And I find those sort of things really exciting and interesting. I love these sort of little patterns and things like that. So then once we've worked with that, we'll start actually starting to create, I will start talking about the significance of things like top, middles, and bases, not just from a perfumery point of view, but what that means in a life journey and in a construction of a formulation. And then basically we'll start to put together formulas, just simple formulas, just from a vibrational perspective. What we'll do people or kind of problems that the world is faced with at the moment. At the moment, there's a lot of a lack of people feeling they have any control over life. Things seem to be happening beyond them. So how do you start to kind of give a sense of their own individuality and their own personal power and courage? So courage is a great one to think about. And so then you start breaking down the word courage and you start to think, what does that involve? Does that just involve, oh, I've got to be brave? Or does that, what do you have to bring into alignment to give people courage? So, loosely, that's kind of what we'll be working with. So we'll really be deep diving into maybe fundamentally, it's going to probably be around 15 to 20 essential oils. But the idea would be for people to then work on other essential oils because they will have learned a methodology that they can apply. And then, we can be just creating things that are so highly transformative that people could inhale, and what I've always been interested about with essential oils, because they can be put topically and can travel into the body, but also be inhaled. You've got this duality, haven't you? You're touching the brain and the memory centers of our body, but also you've got this other alchemical thing going on where it's working on the systems in the body to kind of give you the courage to bring out and release the problems. And that's what I always found was the magic of aromatherapy for me. That there was this kind of the gentleness of it, the benevolence of it. It's a very kind therapy. Never rushes people. I mean, obviously, sometimes people get stuck. So you might use something like German chamomile to just get that bloody anger out, or you know what I mean? You sometimes need these short, sharp shocks because people can become addicted to their problems. So anyway, that is kind of around the lines of how we'll work. We'll look at how you can work with it with sound as well, putting sound vibrations into it. So just really looking at frequency and sound and how you can apply that practically to your practice to elevate, because don't you get tired of treating people for exactly the same thing over and over again because they're just rebuilding and it becomes a kind of indulgence for you to fix it?
Yeah, sticking plaster. That's what I call it, sticking plaster
Exactly.
rather than actually trying to get to the root cause. And I think that you're absolutely right about how aromatherapy is so gentle. It meets a person where they are. And so, sometimes you can talk to somebody about their problems and there are so many obstacles in their mind because, as you quite rightly say, it serves them to keep that perpetuating that problem. That's almost the thing with a karmic disaster in my
Yeah,
case, that you know that you're so used to doing it over and over and over, your whole psyche is used to doing it. And the essential oils are very good at being able to go, okay, let's just move that out the way. Let's work on the soul level. Let's work on the spiritual level, rather than trying to work at the mental level, which is really conditioned to go, no, I'm sorry, we can't change this.
yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is, the other dimension of this kind of blending is you can then create synergies that actually create like a fulcrum that you can hold people in, you know, whether you're making it to sell or whether you're making it for individuals. It suddenly kind of creates, you know, we are living in a time where we're moving out of a kind of biologically based reality, which by that I mean a carbon based reality where we're just going through the motions of living. We're being asked to move higher, to a higher frequency, and you have people like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton and stuff who've been doing this quantum healing, and they have been able to dissolve illnesses by tuning people into this higher vibrational energy. Now, can you imagine what bringing essential oils into that little equation will do as well? So I kind
Yeah,
of think it's a new future medicine. I think this is the time for aromatherapy, if ever there was. And
oh,
I think it's like a renaissance oil. I think it's modality for this time because it works on so many different levels, emotionally, physically, spiritually, but also it has the capacity to raise and dissolve and transform.
I agree, and I think that I mean this is a unique time that we are experiencing so many traumas all at once. You know, in real time, we see a fire, a forest fire. We hear about a war in such and such. We see it. We bombarded with political narrative, as well as all of the stuff that's going in our own lives. And so, to have a modality that goes, switch your mind off, you know, it's the smallest thing, but it is life changing to a lot of people because it is overwhelming. I often find all of the stuff overwhelming, especially when I have to run my business through social media, so there's no avoiding it. You know, you're bombarded with it. Aromatherapy is so helpful, and yet it's not really addressed in the conversations we have about, oh, I've got an aching back, I've got, you know, I've got a cut and a abrasion. So this is like hidden necessarily because it's not what people are searching for on the internet, and yet everybody needs it.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, you know, so I have a business of my own, and you know, 13 years ago, when the first incarnation of it happened, I was really banging on about self-care, and nobody was talking about self-care, you know, and aromatherapy treatment was a bit of an indulgence, and people felt it's like a guilty pleasure. And now self-care is out there.
Mhm.
And I was kind of going, yeah, people are, you know, specifically in lockdown, everybody started, you know, working with self-care, which I think is an amazing thing. But even that has now been sort of almost made into a routine rather than what we were talking about, the sacredness of ourselves, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
actually being present whilst you do it, and not just doing it as yet another task that you have to fulfill during the day. You know, I can remember once I had this quite esteemed doctor came to see me, and you know, she said she looked really cool and together outside, and then she came into the treatment room and basically fell apart. And she said, I don't know, I'm doing my yoga, I'm doing my meditation, I'm doing my gratitude, I'm doing my this, I'm doing my that. And I said, Whoa, I think it's all too much. Why are you doing it? Where is that energy coming from? Is it coming from fear or is it coming from love? And I think too much of what we do in the world nowadays is done through fear.
I agree. We are told all of the time that we are going to get sick, that we are going to run out of money, that we're not going to have time. And so, yeah, you just live by. I have to say, I do this. My latest fear is cholesterol. The whole world's on cholesterol meds and I'm not, and I feel like I'm just running continuously against cholesterol. I can't eat that because of the cholesterol. I've got to have my special yogurt because of the cholesterol, and I realise I don't even taste that yogurt. I just shove it down my neck because I'm medicating all of the time. And as you say, this slowing down.
But that's driven by fear.
Yeah, sure.
It's a fear of fear. So we are not comfortable in our own skin. We're not listening to our natural vibration. So if we're not listening to our natural vibration, how can we tune into other vibration?
Exactly right. And also from the point of view of, if we are engaging with that fear vibration, we're emanating it and we're actually attracting it to ourselves as well. It's the other thing, isn't it?
This goes back to the verbal loop. I actually did something on TikTok about this. Think about what comes out of your mouth. What is your daily mantra? And that is what you are projecting into the world and setting up to come back straight at you. So it's really important to retune your mind. And I would say probably with these vibratory essential oils, the best person to start with would be with yourself. So to use them to fine tune you, and through understanding how it's tuning you in, you then start to understand and listen and hear the different frequencies where there's a lack of harmony. It's really beginning to attune your senses in a different way. And I do think it's time for us to take a little bit of responsibility and actually recognize that we're not victims and we're not lacking in abundance. We really aren't. There is a lot of abundant stuff. Maybe we're lacking in money, material abundance. But actually, if we're not seeing that most of our life is really abundant, and that is the message we're putting out, you're saying you don't deserve to be abundant, that your life is scarce. And so, there's a wonderful book by a lady called Victoria Castle called The Trance of Scarcity. And it talks very much about that, how the minute you shift your perspective, and I found this also with people that I've worked with who've had cancer and things like that, shifting their energy pattern and their energy field and their belief system suddenly starts to create an action of healing, because you're shifting your vibrational level. I'm going off.
Think no, because you took me to a really interesting place, because my next question was going to be, who is this work for? And we will go back to that question in a minute. But I think you're quite right. Knowing what our house is like at the moment, after my husband's been so ill, illness takes you to a very poor frequency, doesn't it? And even though he is healed, thank goodness, thank God, and everybody up there, thank you that he's healed, there is still that fear all of the time. It might come back. And that kind of, that those thoughts are very hard to get rid of. But I think that essential oils are very good at being able to kind of say, lift the vibration. You're using things like citruses and stuff like that. Immediately you go into, I'm into a much lighter, happier place, and that's before we've even had a class. People know that. It's really worthwhile saying to people, remember that whole thing that I always say. Actually, Rhiannon Lewis pointed it out to me. How does an oil make you feel? And it's so important to be able to engage with an essential oil in an other than cerebral way, to be able to say, oh gosh, this is shifting energy in a really interesting way, because how can you do that for somebody else unless you feel it through your body yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, I absolutely agree with you. I think the thing that I've found with working with people who have very serious illnesses, the more you can enable them to to find that space of love for themselves, because often people who get ill think they've done something wrong to deserve it, and you have to almost ignore that frequency and get them to start doing daily practices. So one of the things I give to a lot of my patients is that I work with the inner smile meditation, and that immediately lifts your vibration up. But then when you start sending that energy, once it's lifted, to all of the different aspects of your body that aren't working so well, I mean, it's such a simple meditation and it takes like 15 minutes. But I saw someone who had with an inoperable tumor. Actually, I think he had about 6 weeks. He was given 6 weeks, and he was still going 2 years later. You know, and he was a banker. He had not, an accountant. He was not into anything like this, but he was willing to take it on board. I taught him some qigong exercises. I taught so everything that could actually lift his energy. And I think when you lift your own energy, you start to get new perspective. You're not stuck in an old perspective, and the minute you start to peer over that, you start to see, actually, God, that's what I've been doing to myself all this time. And it suddenly gives you that ability to say, well, I don't need to go back there. I can only go back there if I choose to. And so you do have to be very disciplined. You have to, when, for example, things are difficult financially, one of the things I do is that this is not my reality. I know that I am abundant and I know abundance will come to me. And you just have to lift yourself out of everything that you're hearing around you. It does take a bit of discipline. It's not just about saying, I'll do my gratitude and actually expect something in return. Gratitude is about having gratitude for the fact that you're breathing, that you can walk outside. That's real gratitude. And once you start to do those things and start noticing those little vibrations that lift you up, your whole natural makeup changes. Because
I think it's also worth pointing out that this is really interesting work for somebody who is like stuck in a job and keeps getting overlooked for promotion, or the business just won't grow, all of that kind of stuff, because quite often it will be that they're giving out something that the boss is just going, I don't want any of that. And they don't realize, they're turning up to work every single day, they're doing the job, but there's just something that is emanating from that everybody goes, yeah, no, you can just stay at arm's length. It's really helpful work for those kind of people, isn't it?
yeah, I think most people, I think in some way or another, people are a little bit stuck at the moment. So it's a little bit like we've been suffering with an amnesia, and we've forgotten how to live properly. And so at some point, breaking free is difficult, and this is where I think essential oils can really help, because they can trigger that sense of protection. Or you have something like rosewood, which is really good for giving you courage. Oils like Niauli are really good for working with shock in the system. And for some people, COVID was a shock. Being isolated, whatever. Some people are going through repeated patterns, so you use lavender much more to connect with the pineal gland and break karmic patterns and to release grief. You know, there's lots of different ways to use it. And you were asking me who is this course for? I think to be honest with you, it's anybody who kind of wants to work with the essential oils in a much more expansive, alchemical, magical way. You know, not to be just limited by procedure, that they want to sort of bring in another dynamic. Because I suspect if anyone did this course, it would start to awaken quite a lot of their own connection to the oils. And so they might suddenly find that they will also have information being channeled down to them about how they should use it. So to me, I think it's an activating course. It would be great if people had a reasonable knowledge of the oils, but also if they came with an open mind and not too fixed an idea of how the oils are used, you know, because I'm going to tip it on its side a little bit.
Mm. And how do you feel about aromatherapy qualifications? Necessary, not necessary?
Oh, I think if it's people who've been working with the oils for a long time, I think then their knowledge will be there of the oils. I think the qualifications are more needed for people who are going to work as
I
practitioners
agree.
and do hands-on work.
I agree.
That's what I think.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I think that this work would probably suit people like kinesiologists, reflexologists, who have got a few oils but don't really know that much about oils, but understand energy, acupuncturists, that kind of thing. I think all of them would get a lot of work out of this course. Do you not agree?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think, you know, in a way, we're all working with energy, aren't we?
For
We
sure.
all are, you know, whether you're a kinesiologist and you're bringing the body into harmony with things that are out of kilter, whether you're an acupuncturist, you're helping meridians to unblock and things to flow. You know,
Yeah.
it's all interwoven, it's just different names and different applications.
Okay, let's do a quick overview then. So we're going to do an introductory class, which
Mm-hmm.
is on the 25th of April. And because we're both British and we are sick of getting up in the middle of the night, it's in British time. So Friday evening, 6 till 8 GMT. Now, this introductory course is charged on its own. It's £75. As I say, you get the 2 hours. And then if you feel, yes, I really want to go ahead and do more of this, then the course itself is 6 sessions, Fridays. So I'll give you the dates. May 16th, May 23rd, May 30th, June the 6th, June the 13th, June the 20th. So how lovely to finish just before the solstice, all lovely energy flowing. And for the 6 sessions, it's £475. Or if you would like to pay monthly, you can do it over 3 months, payments of £160. And of course, it's hosted by the Aromatic Mystery School. Is there anything else that you would like to say it before you go?
Oh, I hope what I've been talking about has piqued your interest, and I will be so delighted if you came and joined me, because I think this is the beginning of something really, really special.
I agree.
That's it.
Aromatherapy is shifting, and I am so excited that you're going to be with us to do it. So, Michelle, thank you so much. Say goodbye.
Goodbye.